I never thought I'd be the person filing police charges against my own sister. Family is supposed to be sacred, right? That's what I always believed, until I opened that credit card statement and my entire world shifted. Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. It was just an ordinary Tuesday. I'd gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and started sorting through my mail. Bills, junk, more bills, the usual. I almost tossed the credit card statement aside to deal with later, but something made me open it. Maybe it was fate, maybe just random chance. Either way, that envelope changed everything. At first, I thought there was some mistake. There had to be. The balance was over $3,000 when I knew I'd only used it for gas and groceries that month. My heart started racing as I scanned through the charges. A $400 purchase at Nordstrom, multiple food delivery orders, online shopping sprees, hundreds spent at makeup stores. None of this was me. "I've been hacked," I remember saying out loud to my empty apartment. That was the only explanation that made sense. Someone had somehow gotten my credit card information and gone on a shopping spree. I immediately called the bank's fraud department, my hands shaking as I waited on hold. The representative was helpful, going through each charge one by one. "Do you recognize this transaction at Starbucks on Main Street? $7.65? "No, that wasn't me," I said, growing more anxious by the minute. "And this one at Sephora for $136.92? Definitely not." Then came the question that changed everything. "Can you verify the last 4 digits of the card used for these transactions?" I grabbed my wallet and checked my card. 5742, I confirmed. There was a pause. "Ma'am, these purchases were made with the physical card, not just the card number. The chip was present for most of these transactions." That's when the first chill ran down my spine. Someone hadn't just stolen my information, they'd somehow gotten their hands on my actual card. But how? I always kept it in my wallet. I hadn't lost it. I was holding it right then. "Is there perhaps a second card on your account? An authorized user?" the representative asked. "No, absolutely not. I live alone. I've never authorized anyone else." After filing the fraud claim, I hung up and sat there, stunned. I started mentally retracing my steps, trying to figure out who could have accessed my physical card. Then I remembered. 3 months ago, my younger sister Melanie had stayed with me for a week while she was between apartments. She'd been having financial troubles, or so she claimed. I'd let her crash on my couch, bought her groceries, even lent her some cash to get back on her feet. No, I thought. It couldn't be Melanie. She wouldn't do that to me. But a sinking feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I decided to do some detective work before jumping to conclusions. I pulled up Instagram and scrolled through my sister's recent posts. My blood ran cold. There she was, at a restaurant I'd never been to, but that appeared on my statement. In another post, she was showing off new makeup with the Sephora bag clearly visible in the background. The date matched the charge on my account. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own sister. The person I'd grown up with. The person I'd helped when she needed it. She had stolen from me, not in a moment of desperation, but systematically, over months. I called her immediately. When she answered, her voice was casual, almost cheerful. "Hey, what's up?" "Melanie," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I need to ask you something important. Have you been using my credit card?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "It's not what you think," she finally said, her tone instantly defensive. "I was going to pay you back. I just needed a little help, and you're always so weird about money." "Weird about money?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You stole from me. You took my card and spent thousands of dollars without asking." "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "It's not like you can't afford it. You have that fancy job and that nice apartment. What's family for if we can't help each other out?" I was speechless. In her mind, this wasn't theft. It was some kind of family resource sharing that I was too selfish to understand. "Melanie, what you did is literally credit card fraud. It's a crime. You need to pay me back. All of it, right now." She laughed. She actually laughed. "Right now? I don't have that kind of money just lying around. Come on, sis. We're family. What are you going to do? Call the cops on me?" That's exactly what I should have done, right then and there. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. She was my sister. Despite everything, some part of me still wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, that we could work this out. "I need that money back," I insisted. "All of it. This month." "Fine, whatever," she said dismissively. "I'll figure something out. But seriously, you could stand to be a little more generous. It's not like I bought anything crazy. Just stuff I needed." I hung up, too angry to continue the conversation. As I scrolled back through the statement, stuff she needed apparently included expensive restaurants, clothing, concert tickets, and who knows what else. The more I looked, the more charges I found from previous months. This hadn't been a one-time thing. She'd been systematically stealing from me for what looked like at least 3 months. The financial reality hit me hard. I'd been planning to use my savings for a down payment on a condo. Now I was looking at thousands in credit card debt that I hadn't planned for. My carefully built budget was in shambles. The rent was due in a week, and I was suddenly short. All because my sister decided my money was hers for the taking. That night, I barely slept. I kept cycling between rage, hurt, and disbelief. How could she do this to me? We'd had our differences growing up, sure, but this level of betrayal was something I never could have imagined. I tried calling her again the next day, but she didn't pick up. Instead, she sent a text. "Stop freaking out. I'll pay you when I can." When I told my best friend what happened, she was shocked. "You need to report this," she insisted. "Melanie committed fraud. What she did is a serious crime." "But she's my sister," I said weakly. "Would a sister do this to you?" my friend asked gently. She was right, of course. But something held me back. Years of being told that family comes first, that you protect your own, no matter what. I decided to give Melanie one more chance to make things right. Instead, things got worse. Much worse. A week passed with no word from Melanie. My calls went straight to voicemail, and my texts were left on read. Meanwhile, I was scrambling to figure out how to cover my rent and still make minimum payments on the credit card. I had to dip into my emergency savings. Money I'd been putting aside for years. Every dollar I took out felt like another betrayal. When Melanie finally reached out, it wasn't to apologize or repay what she'd stolen. No, she called to ask if she could stay with me again because she was going through a rough patch. The audacity was breathtaking. "Are you serious right now?" I asked her. "You steal thousands of dollars from me, ignore me for a week, and now you want to crash at my place." "God, you're still on that." She sighed dramatically. "Look, it wasn't that much money. And I told you I'll pay you back eventually." "Eventually isn't good enough, Mel. I need that money now. I had to use my emergency fund to cover rent because of you." There was a pause before she replied, her voice suddenly small and quivering. "I didn't know it would cause you so much trouble. Things have just been so hard for me lately. You have no idea what I'm going through." And there it was, the script she'd been using our entire lives. Poor Melanie, always the victim, always dealing with problems so much bigger than anyone else's. I'd fallen for it countless times before, but not this time. This isn't about your problems, I told her firmly. This is about you stealing from me. I didn't steal, she snapped, the vulnerable act vanishing instantly. I borrowed. That's what sisters do. We help each other out. Before I could respond, there was a familiar voice in the background on her end of the call. Is that your sister? Let me talk to her. My mother. Of course, Melanie had gone crying to her. Honey, my mom said after taking the phone. I think you're blowing this way out of proportion. Melanie made a mistake, but she's really struggling right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, she committed credit card fraud. She stole thousands of dollars from me. Don't use words like fraud and stole, my mother chided. This is your sister we're talking about. Family helps family. Would you be saying that if I'd taken her credit card and maxed it out? I challenged. My mother sighed that familiar, disappointed sigh. You've always been the responsible one. You can bounce back from this. Melanie needs more support. She's more sensitive. Translation. Melanie gets a free pass, while I'm expected to clean up her mess. The same dynamic that had defined our childhood was playing out again, only with higher stakes. She needs to pay me back, I insisted. All of it. And she will, in time, my mother assured me. But right now, I think what she really needs is her big sister's understanding. She's been crying all day about this. The guilt trip. Classic move. I felt myself wavering, that lifetime of conditioning kicking in. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just what family did for each other. But then I remembered my empty savings account. The condo I couldn't put a down payment on. The hours I'd worked to earn that money, while Melanie spent it on makeup and restaurants. I need to go, I said finally. Tell Melanie she has 1 month to start paying me back, or I'm taking this further. I hung up before my mother could respond. The next day, my brother called, then my aunt. Even my cousin sent a message. Somehow I had become the villain in Melanie's story, the cold-hearted sister who wouldn't help poor, struggling Melanie in her time of need. No one seemed concerned about my financial situation. No one asked how I was managing. It was all about Melanie's feelings, Melanie's struggles, Melanie. Out of curiosity, I checked her social media again. What I found made my blood boil. While supposedly being too broke to pay me back, she had posted pictures from a weekend trip to the beach. There she was, smiling in a new sundress, fancy cocktail in hand, at what looked like an expensive resort. The captions were full of hashtags like #selfcare and #blessed. I took screenshots and sent them to my mother. This is what Melanie is doing with my money while she's too broke to pay me back. My mom's response? Everyone deserves a break now and then. Don't be so judgmental. It felt like I was taking crazy pills. Was I really the unreasonable one here? Melanie's manipulation continued. She'd text me late at night. Things like, I can't sleep because I'm so worried about disappointing you. Or, I'd pay you back if I could, but I can barely afford to eat right now. All while her Instagram showed a very different reality. One day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red as if she'd been crying. I came to apologize, she said, looking appropriately contrite. You're right. What I did was wrong. I promise I'll pay you back. Relief washed over me. Finally, she was acknowledging what she'd done. I can give you $200 now, she continued, pulling out an envelope. And then maybe $50 a month after that. It's all I can afford. I did the math quickly. At that rate, it would take over 5 years to repay the debt. But at least it was something. I appreciate you coming here and acknowledging what happened, I said, accepting the envelope. I think that's a reasonable start. Her face brightened immediately. Great. So we're good? Because I was hoping I could stay here this weekend. There's this concert I want to go to. And hotels downtown are so expensive. And just like that, I realized nothing had changed. The apology, the token payment, it was all just to get back in my good graces, to use me again. "No, Melanie," I said firmly. "You can't stay here." Her expression darkened. Wow, so much for forgiveness. I came all this way, gave you money I can't really spare, and you still won't help me out? That's cold, even for you. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Later that night, I opened the envelope. Inside was $120, not the $200 she'd promised. Even her apology was a lie. The next weekend, my credit card company called. There had been an attempt to use my card at a high-end clothing store. Someone had tried to charge over $1,000. The only reason it was declined was that I'd put a freeze on the account. When I checked my wallet, my card was still there. Then it hit me. Melanie must have made a copy of my card information. Either that, or she had somehow ordered a duplicate. That was the moment I knew this would never end. The manipulation, the lies, the theft. It would continue as long as I allowed it. Something inside me hardened. I'd given her chances. I'd tried to be understanding. Now it was time for real consequences. I just never imagined how ugly things would get once I took that step. Filing a police report against your own sister isn't something you do lightly. I sat in my car outside the police station for nearly an hour, questioning everything. Was I overreacting? Was I betraying my family? Would I regret this for the rest of my life? But then I remembered the attempted $1,000 charge. The lies, the manipulation, the complete lack of remorse. And I knew that if I didn't do something now, this cycle would continue indefinitely. Walking into that police station was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The officer at the front desk gave me a sympathetic look as I explained the situation, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "Unfortunately, we see this kind of thing a lot," he told me. "Family fraud is more common than most people realize." I filled out the paperwork, provided all the evidence I had, the statements, the screenshots of Melanie's social media posts showing her using my money, the record of the declined transaction. With each document I handed over, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. "What happens now?" I asked when it was all done. "We'll investigate, and if there's sufficient evidence, which it seems like there is, we'll move forward with charges. Credit card fraud is a serious offense." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. "And will my sister be arrested?" "Most likely, yes. There will probably be an arrest, followed by a court date." The reality of what I was doing hit me full force. I was setting in motion a series of events that could result in my sister having a criminal record, maybe even going to jail. Part of me wanted to take it all back, to find another way. "You can still change your mind," the officer said gently as if reading my thoughts. "But I should tell you that in my experience, people who do this kind of thing rarely stop on their own. Without consequences, the behavior usually escalates." I thought about Melanie's pattern, starting with borrowing my card for small purchases, escalating to thousands in charges, then attempting to make an even larger purchase after promising to repay me. The officer was right. This wouldn't stop without intervention. "I want to proceed," I said firmly. 3 days later, I received a call from my mother. She was hysterical. "How could you?" she screamed into the phone. "The police just took Melanie away in handcuffs. Your own sister. What is wrong with you?" I had known this was coming, but it still hit hard. "Mom, she stole thousands of dollars from me. She committed fraud. She had chances to make it right and chose not to." "She's your sister. Family doesn't do this to family." "Exactly," I replied. "Family doesn't steal from family. Melanie is the one who crossed that line, not me." I don't even know who you are anymore, my mother said, her voice cold. Your father would be ashamed. That was a low blow, bringing my deceased father into this. But it was typical of how my mother fought, using anything and everything as emotional ammunition. Dad taught me to stand up for myself, I said quietly. That's what I'm doing. She hung up on me. The texts started pouring in immediately after. My brother, what the actual hell is wrong with you? My aunt, I never thought you'd stoop this low. My cousin, way to destroy the family. It was as if I was the criminal, not Melanie. No one asked for my side of the story. No one seemed to care that I was the victim. In their eyes, pressing charges against family was the greater sin. The worst call came from my uncle, who had always been the family mediator. Melanie's a mess, he told me. She's facing felony charges. Do you understand what that will do to her life? Her future? All over some money? It's not about the money, I tried to explain. It's about the betrayal. The complete lack of remorse. The fact that she kept doing it even after being caught. He wasn't listening. She's your little sister. You're supposed to protect her, not destroy her. I wanted to scream. Where was all this concern for protection when Melanie was systematically stealing from me? When she was putting my financial future at risk? When she was lying to my face? But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Their minds were made up. 2 weeks after her arrest, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Please don't hang up, Melanie said, her voice small and broken. She was calling from the county jail. I just need to talk to you. For a moment, I considered ending the call, but something made me stay on the line. I'm listening. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I never thought it would come to this. I never meant to hurt you. Please, please drop the charges. I'll do anything. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear. I've learned my lesson. There was a desperation in her voice I'd never heard before. For the first time, she sounded genuinely remorseful, but I'd heard her false apologies before. Why should I believe you now? I asked. Because I've never been more scared in my life, she admitted. I'm in jail, surrounded by actual criminals. My court date is next week, and my lawyer says I could face serious time. My life is falling apart, and it's all my fault. I see that now. I was selfish and entitled and just awful to you. You didn't deserve any of this. I remained silent, trying to sort through my feelings. Part of me ached for my little sister, the girl I'd grown up with, but another part remembered the systematic betrayal, the gaslighting, the family turned against me. If you drop the charges, she continued when I didn't respond, I promise I'll make this right. I'll get a real job. I'll pay you back on a schedule. I'll go to therapy. Whatever it takes. I need to think about it, I said finally. Please, she whispered. You're ruining my entire future. That phrase, so manipulative, so classic Melanie, snapped me back to reality. No, Melanie. You ruined your future when you decided to commit fraud. These are the consequences of your actions, not mine. So you're really going to do this? Let your own sister go to prison. I didn't put you there. You did that all by yourself. I hung up, my hands shaking. I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, completely cut off from my family. My mother wasn't speaking to me. My extended family had made it clear whose side they were on. I had never felt more isolated. But beneath the pain and loneliness, there was something else. A quiet certainty that I was finally breaking a toxic pattern. For years, Melanie had taken advantage of me, and our family had enabled her. By refusing to back down, I was sending a message. I value myself enough to demand respect. I deserve better than to be used and discarded. The road ahead would be difficult. Melanie's court date was approaching, and I would have to testify. My family might never forgive me, but for the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. And despite everything, it felt right. The day of Melanie's court hearing arrived faster than I expected. Walking into that courtroom was surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. I sat alone on one side of the gallery while my mother, brother, and several other family members clustered together on the opposite side, pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. When Melanie was brought in, I barely recognized her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. She looked small in her standard-issue jumpsuit, her face pale and drawn. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something I'd never seen from her before. Genuine shame. The proceedings moved quickly. Melanie had accepted a plea deal. She would plead guilty to credit card fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. No jail time, but 18 months of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and most importantly, full restitution of the stolen funds plus associated fees. The judge was clear. If she violated any terms of her probation or failed to make timely payments, she would face incarceration. Ms. Walker, the judge addressed me directly after the sentencing. Are these terms acceptable to you as the victim in this case? I stood, feeling every eye in the courtroom on me. Yes, Your Honor. Very well. Court is adjourned. As everyone filed out, my mother brushed past me without a word. My brother gave me a look of pure disgust. Only my Aunt Susan paused, surprising me by squeezing my hand briefly before following the others. That small gesture of support meant more than she could know. The next few months were a study in isolation. Family gatherings happened without me. Holidays came and went with no invitations. My calls to my mother went unanswered. It was as if I'd been excommunicated for the sin of holding Melanie accountable. Meanwhile, the court-ordered restitution payments began arriving punctually each month. I put every cent toward rebuilding my savings and repairing my credit score, which had taken a hit from the whole ordeal. Slowly, my financial situation stabilized. I even qualified for a loan pre-approval. The condo dream wasn't dead after all. 4 months after the court hearing, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Susan. I think it's time we had coffee, she said without preamble. Are you free tomorrow? We met at a small cafe downtown. Susan had always been the family truth teller, never one to sugarcoat reality or play along with pretense. Still, I braced myself for a lecture. Instead, she surprised me. I owe you an apology, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. I should have supported you from the beginning. I nearly choked on my latte. What changed your mind? Nothing changed. I always knew you were right. She sighed heavily. But family dynamics are complicated. It's easier to pressure the reasonable person to give in than to hold the unreasonable one accountable. That simple acknowledgement of what I'd always known but never heard spoken aloud brought tears to my eyes. The truth is, Susan continued, Melanie has been pulling stunts like this her whole life. Your parents always cleaned up her messes, made excuses for her behavior. She never had to face consequences. Until now, I said quietly. Until now, Susan agreed. And you know what? This is the first time I've seen any real growth from her. She's actually holding down a job. She's living within her means. She's not constantly in crisis. All because someone finally said, enough. It was validating to hear, but it didn't erase the pain of the past months. The rest of the family doesn't see it that way. They will in time. Your mother is stubborn, but she's not blind. And your brother follows her lead. He always has. As we parted ways, Susan hugged me tightly. You did the right thing. Don't ever doubt that. A week later, I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter from Melanie. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity won out. I've started this letter 100 times, she wrote. Nothing seems adequate. I'm sorry. Doesn't begin to cover what I did to you. The theft was bad enough, but the way I manipulated you afterward was even worse. I took advantage of your love and your loyalty. I turned the family against you when you were the victim. There's no excuse for any of it. The financial counseling the court ordered has opened my eyes to how destructive my behavior has been, not just to you, but to myself. I've been living in a fantasy world, thinking I deserved a lifestyle I hadn't earned. I've been making everyone else responsible for my choices. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not writing to ask for that. I just want you to know that you forcing me to face consequences was the wake-up call I needed. For the first time in my life, I'm taking responsibility for myself. I have a steady job now. I'm budgeting. I'm in therapy. I'm finally growing up, at 26. I miss you. I miss who we were before I ruined everything. Maybe someday, if you're willing, we could try to build something new. Not right away. I have a lot more work to do on myself first, but someday. With love and genuine remorse, Melanie. I read the letter 3 times, searching for the usual manipulation tactics, the subtle guilt trips. I didn't find them. Still, words were easy. Actions would tell the true story. Over the next 6 months, Melanie continued to make her restitution payments without fail. Occasionally, she'd include a short note with updates on her life. Always respectful, never pushy about reconciliation. I didn't respond, but I read every word. Meanwhile, my own life was flourishing. I'd closed on that condo I'd been saving for. My career was advancing. I'd established clear boundaries in all my relationships, no longer allowing myself to be the perpetual giver while others took advantage. The painful experience with Melanie had taught me an invaluable lesson about self-worth. Nearly a year after the court hearing, I received an invitation to my cousin's wedding. It would be the first family event where I'd face everyone since the rift. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the awkwardness and potential hostility. But a stronger part refused to hide any longer. The ceremony was beautiful, but I spent it acutely aware of my mother and brother seated several rows away, studiously pretending I didn't exist. During the reception, I kept to the periphery, chatting with distant relatives and friends of the family. Then my mother approached, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to me wordlessly. We stood in uncomfortable silence, watching the dancers. Melanie's doing well, she said finally. Better than she ever has, actually. I nodded, uncertain how to respond. Susan tells me that's because of you, because you forced her to grow up. Coming from my mother, this was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. It wasn't easy, I said carefully. No, I imagine it wasn't. She hesitated, then added, You're a lot like your father. He never let people walk all over him either. The comparison to my father, delivered without the usual accusatory tone, felt like an olive branch. We weren't back to normal, whatever normal had been, but it was a start. 2 years after Melanie stole my credit card, she made her final restitution payment. She sent it with a simple note. Thank you for teaching me the hardest, most important lesson of my life. I finally called her. We met for coffee, neutral territory. The conversation was awkward at first, both of us carefully navigating this new terrain. She wasn't the same person who had so casually betrayed me. There was a maturity to her now, a groundedness that had never existed before. Sometimes the hardest choices protect us from future harm. I told her when she asked why I hadn't dropped the charges despite family pressure. Not just me, but you too. You needed to learn that actions have consequences. I get that now, she said, meeting my eyes directly. And I'm grateful. As bizarre as that sounds. We're not best friends. The trust that was shattered will take years to rebuild, if it ever fully does. But we're finding a new way to be sisters. One built on mutual respect, rather than enabling and resentment. As for me, I've learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you the villain, even when others try to cast you in that role. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. And sometimes, the hardest choice is exactly the one that needs to be made. Setting that boundary cost me dearly in the short term. But in the end, it freed us both. Me from the role of perpetual doormat, and Melanie from the prison of her own making. Sometimes, that's what real love looks like.